For most of its history, Apple didn't build servers. Macs were creative machines, personal computers, but servers? That was someone else's business. And yet, in the early 2000s, Apple made a bold move. Not just with the brand new Mac OS X, but with a very specific piece of hardware. They built a rack-mount server, designed to run in a data center 24/7. Meet the Xserve, arguably the most elegant rack server ever made.
Let's talk about legacy network technology. I'm the Vintage Collector and these are my stories.
Over the past episodes, we've been digging deep into Apple's UNIX journey. From AUX to NextStep, OpenStep and Rhapsody to the very first releases of Mac OS X, we followed how Apple slowly rebuilt its operating system foundations. But for a long time, a crucial piece was still missing though, a real server platform. Classic macOS could do file sharing, printing, even web hosting with third-party software, but the system software was never designed to be a true server operating system. Cooperative multitasking, no memory protection, and the occasional system crash made it largely unsuitable for anything beyond small workgroup use. Despite that, Apple sold Apple Workgroup Servers and later Macintosh servers, which were essentially standard Centris, Quadra and Power Macintosh machines with classic Mac OS. The one notable exception was the Workgroup Server 95, a Quadra 950 variant that shipped with AUX, Apple's own UNIX, which we've already explored in previous episodes. In contrast, the Apple Network Server, introduced in 1996 under the codename Shiner, was a completely separate product line that deliberately did not qualify as a Macintosh at all. These PowerPC-based systems ran IBM's AIX exclusively. Their ROMs explicitly prevented booting macOS, and they represented Apple's first attempt at purpose-built enterprise server hardware. Aiming for stability, it was not unexpected that Apple turned to IBM's AIX. At that point, classic macOS had long reached its architectural limits. AUX had already been shelved, and Copeland, Apple's attempt to modernize macOS, was collapsing rather than converging. Also, Apple's acquisition of Next, which would eventually deliver the foundation for Mac OS X, was still far away. In contrast, UNIX systems had long established themselves as reliable server backends, offering mature networking and file services well beyond what classic macOS could provide. SGI systems running IRIX were commonly used in publishing and media environments, and could be paired with Apple Share compatible solutions such as Xinet's KA Share. Even non-UNIX platforms like Windows NT Server and Novell NetWare had established their own implementations for serving Apple clients, and at one point Apple itself experimented with this direction through Project Wormhole to bring NetWare to the PowerPC platform. This was ultimately abandoned as the network server and its AIX strategy took shape. But the Apple Network Server failed to catch on in the market. And it came right into troubled waters, as by 1997 Apple found itself in a deep financial crisis. As an effect of refocusing Apple onto core priorities, then CEO Gil Amelio cancelled many projects in early 1997, including the Apple Network Server. The phase that followed would eventually culminate in Rhapsody, Apple's first attempt to merge NextStep with Macintosh concepts, and with it the first incarnation of macOS X Server 1.0. Only by 1998, Apple would start selling servers again, although this was essentially just the blue and white PowerMac G3 bundled with macOS 8 and some specific server software add-ons. When Mac OS X Server 1.0, based on Rhapsody, was released in March 1999, it became the default OS for the then current PowerMac G4 server, which again was just a rebranded desktop system. This combo remained on sale into 2001 until Mac OS X 10.0 arrived, and along with it, the new Mac OS X Server 10.0. In the meantime, Apple secretly worked on something different, eventually unveiled in May 2002.
So we're going to add another piece of innovation today coming from Apple, which is a server, and we call it Xserve. And this is our first offering. We've listened to our customers a lot, and we think we got a pretty hot product. But we know that for everything we know, there's 10 things we don't know. So we're approaching this very humbly.
The Xserve just came at the right time. With the release of macOS 10 10.1 a few months prior, OS X had greatly improved in stability and performance compared to the troubled 10.0 early adopters release. The first units shipped with 10.1.5, but from August 2002 onwards, Jaguar became the default, bringing with it key improvements like HFS Plus journaling, critical not only for desktops but in particular for server operations. So let's take a closer look at the original 2002 Xserve. This machine wasn't just about sleek design, but about positioning Apple in the enterprise and education IT markets. Common use cases range from web, file and mail servers to high-performance computing clusters. In fact, Apple later offered a dedicated cluster node version for compute-intensive deployments with no optical drive, only one Ethernet port and no graphics card. I must say, it's really a beautifully crafted machine. It's a pity mine is so heavily beaten up. Contrary to most 19-inch servers, the Xserve doesn't have chassis-mounted rails. It's a completely different design, consisting of the top enclosure and a drawer-like base unit. The top mounts to the rack directly and uses extension brackets for the rear posts. Sadly, I don't have those mounting brackets and neither do I have the cable management arm. And the small retainer clip for the power cord is missing too. For maintenance purposes, you would then simply loosen the front thumb screws. The base unit of the chassis then simply slides out like a drawer, granting access to the inside. This was built from the ground up for rack deployment, and when we look inside, it becomes clear this is not just a desktop Mac shoved into a metal tray. Internally, it looks clean and tidy, with just an AGP graphics card and a second network adapter equipped. The latter looks a little bit like an early revision unit as it exposes this random jump wire here. And it makes it feel even more like an afterthought, as the rack mount servers I worked on back then all had dual Ethernet ports on board already. Apple switched to providing 2 onboard ports in later Xserve models. But that's not the only difference from later revisions, as the early G4 Xserve only supports 2 GB of RAM, equipable in up to 4 modules with 512 MB capacity. ECC memory was also not supported yet. 2 models were available with either single or dual 1 GHz PowerPC G4 7455 processors, each with 2 MB of L3 cache. The machine also features FireWire, USB and a serial DB9 connector. This is unusual since Apple had long declared serial connectors as legacy and they haven't been seen on Macintoshes since the late 90s anymore. But DB9 or RS-232 are still in wide use in data centers even today, so it was only natural to include a serial console port on the Xserve. That said, this was not a lights-out management port as seen in later Xserve revisions, but only a console port. It allowed boot time monitoring and console access to macOS 10. The current NVRAM battery reads a plain 0, so I'll replace it right away. Now look at these small clamps here. They would lock the base unit in position. To unlock, you just need to press these levers, then the base unit slides back into the rack. The front panel gives access to 4 hot swappable drive bays. Each drive was connected via its own ATA channel, allowing for high disk throughput without SCSI. Apple's own drive modules came in 60 and 120 GB sizes, and with all 4 slots populated you could reach up to 480 GB of internal storage. Of course, larger parallel ATA drives do work, like this 200GB drive here. As mentioned, it originally shipped with macOS X Server 10.1.5, but for today I'll be installing macOS Server 10.2.3.
By the power PCs of Grayskull, I have the power.
What surprised me was that there was no drive activity indicator for the CD-ROM drive, and loading up OS X took a considerable amount of time. But eventually I'm on the OS X installer, ready to partition the disk drive and then head off into the installation procedure. This looks very similar to the desktop version in the early stages, but soon the macOS X server system takes over. From here it will only continue once you provide the license key. Then you'll define the usual server stuff, usernames, passwords, hostnames and IP address, and services to run. Once completed, macOS X then boots into the familiar Aqua desktop, although with a slightly toned down color scheme. The dock is loaded with server-specific apps like the Workgroup Manager, the Server Status Dashboard and the Server Monitor. The latter provides detailed insights into the system health and allows you to light up the identification LEDs on the back and the front of the unit. Because of the server-specific components and services, macOS X Server uses its own distinct patch files for upgrades. But other than that, it generally looks and feels pretty much the same as its desktop sibling. And while it also provides the classic control panel, running classic on the Xserve G4 was not officially supported, but doable using some unofficial tricks. I didn't try this myself though. Following the first G4-based Xserves in 2002, Apple released G5-based models in 2004, introducing 64-bit CPUs, ECC memory and a redesigned chassis. Then in 2006 came the Intel Xeon-based Xserves with more power, more storage and enterprise features like redundant power supplies and lights-out management. The latter is also available in some present-day Macs. In 2010, Apple quietly announced the end of the Xserve, with final sales stopping in early 2011. Steve Jobs himself is quoted for saying, "Hardly anyone bought the Xserve." As no official numbers are known or had ever been published, one has to rely on third-party sources, claiming Apple had a 4% market share in the server business at the time. After all, we can say, had it been really paying off as a business, they would certainly not have ended it. From that point onward, Apple shifted its server strategy. The software evolved, though some would argue it actually regressed. Dedicated macOS server builds were discontinued, replaced by the server app, which was distributed through the App Store and slowly lost more and more functionality over time. Eventually, in 2022, the server app itself was discontinued entirely. Today, Apple has largely returned to a stage of where they were in the 90s. No dedicated server operating system and also no actual server hardware. For the OS, you're probably off better by running a server-oriented Linux distro anyway, or you push macOS to the next level by installing OSS software like Apache et al. Through ports or homebrew. On the hardware side, Mac Pros and Mac Minis have been positioned as server-like options since. Especially the Mac Mini remains a popular choice, often tucked into racks using third-party mounting solutions. After the detour with the infamous 2013 trashcan Mac Pro, we saw the return of the tower form factor with the 2019 Mac Pro, which at least comes with a 19-inch rack mount option. And yet, Apple is building servers again. Recent rumors about Apple working with Foxconn to build Apple Intelligence servers in new US facilities have now been confirmed. These machines are built in Texas, but they're not for sale. Unlike the Xserve, which was marketed to businesses and institutions, these servers are hidden away in data centers powering Apple Intelligence. From today's perspective, the Xserve feels like a footnote. It wasn't a market success, but it was a statement. For a brief moment, Apple wanted to be taken seriously in the data center, and they built something beautiful to prove it. How about you? Did you ever come along macOS X server and the Apple Xserve, and what was your experience with it? Let me know in the comments below. I'm the Vintage Collector, and this was my story for today. Thanks for watching, and see you again next Sunday.